From Anchor, it's the Treeo podcast, starring Bubble and Curbs. This is Who's Bubble alongside Mr. Curbs of the Treeo Orchestra, inviting you to join the trio and special guests Dr. Voz and Jordan. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the trio! Hello, everyone. Ladies, gentlemen. This is the Trio podcast alongside Mr. Curbs and special guests Dr. Voz and Jordan. This is episode 69, Curbs?
Oh.
Wait,
can't
is
believe
it?
we made that far. Yeah, it is.
It's a pleasure to be here. Curbs, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. Just a busy day.
Okay. I heard you are... What are you busy doing, Curbs? We want to know.
No, it's not important. That's not what we're here to talk about.
Okay, sorry. The importance at hand here is Israel and Palestine. We have two debaters here. One is pro-Israel, his name is Jordan, and the other is pro-Palestinian, I guess you would say.
Probably one of the most
Dr.
controversial topics we could have possibly done for an episode, but I guess you gotta make episode 69 special.
Yeah, so welcome. We made it to 69, but how are you guys doing, Jordan, Dr. Voz?
Great. Happy to be here. Nice to meet you folks.
I'm doing well.
Okay. The accent
Didn't
always gets...
expect that. I didn't expect the accent.
All right, well... Sorry. Curves, can you, I'm dead.
You're dead?
Yeah.
Why don't we just have, we're running a podcast here. Why don't we just have everyone introduce themselves, right? Like, introduce, like, their background, stuff like that.
Yes.
Sure. We'll let your
work in-
recurring guest go first, out of politeness.
Oh, yeah, sure. Dr. Voz.
Hello, my name is Dr. Voz. I have a doctorate in zoology, but also I have been taking courses in international law as a side hobby, and studying human rights issues around the world. I'm pretty passionate about these topics, and my studies.
Where are you from?
We have had you before, but like you've never really showed interest in something like this, so I was kind of curious.
Yes, I am from, Cleveland, local area. Well, that's at least where I live currently, but I was born in Hungary, so I grew up there.
Okay.
In Cleveland or Hungary?
Hungary, I moved to Cleveland.
Oh, okay. I was about to say, doesn't sound like no Cleveland accent.
Is that dog your... Is that your dog on your profile?
Yes, it is my dog.
Yeah,
It's so... I'm looking at the dog and then I'm hearing you talk and it's creeping me out. Anyway, Jordan, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. I put my dog on my lock screen on my phone. I just don't use it as my avatar. I drew this guy. So I am Canadian. I grew up in Southern Ontario, which is why I have this North American accent. I lived in Israel for a couple of years around the time that COVID started, and I left not long after October 7th. And I am back in Canada at the moment. And
it's good that you got out of there.
yeah, it was a bit hectic. So in terms of my background, I am, I guess, Scottish Canadian. My mom moved to Canada from Scotland when she was a kid, and my dad's side of the family is Jewish. That's my connection to Israel.
All right.
I'm not particularly Jewish. I just understand where they're coming from, and I'm excited to talk about the controversial subject here.
Yeah, me myself, I'm not really that educated on the subject like that much like at all. I just have a basic idea of like kind of what's happening. So
That's good because then you'll have a lot
yeah,
of questions, and I'm sure we could
yeah.
both fill you in.
Well, we could go over the historical context here. The Ottoman
I don't
Empire,
even know.
the
I don't
British
even know that
Mandate.
part. I just know it's like a religious war.
Well, Israel was established in 1948, and some key
Well,
wars.
yeah, I know that. I know that because like it was like a apology after like World War II.
Okay, okay. We'll
Well, there
build
was
off from there.
like World War One. I think is where we would want to start in modern times. So World War One led to the end of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire had been around for centuries and centuries, and without them around, all the land, which was extensive, had to be parceled out to the Allies. France dealt with some of the territory. The British dealt with other parts of the territory, which is what we're concerned with. They created this British Mandate of Palestine, which included what's now Jordan and Israel and Gaza and the West Bank. Jordan split off very early, which would be the East Bank, and everyone knows how Jordan's doing. And that's just kind of the first, 30 seconds of history from World War One to
Mm.
now.
That's
All right.
nice to know. It's nice to know where how things started.
So, what don't you like about the other side? Why don't we start with that? Because that's very positive.
No. Let's start off with what you like about your side. I feel like that'd be better to start off with.
Right, right, okay.
I'm sure we all come to any discussion with our biases, and I feel as though not just having a bit of a Jewish background, but coming from a Western country, being raised with Western values, this is, homosexuality is fine. We don't need to make any laws against it. Women can vote and work and wear whatever they want. Democracy, all these things. I'm pro those things. And I think any country that's an ally of the West, any country with Western values, is going to be a pretty good country, or at least start with a good foundation. And I think that if you look at countries that don't value any of these things or are actively fighting against them, I'm not going to be a fan.
Right.
Yeah, I mean that is true. I mean, most countries that don't follow like I mean, it doesn't have to be like American values, but like, values similar to America's are often like dictatorships and they're not really cool to be in.
Separation of church and state, that's also a big one. That's where it gets into a big difference between, say, Israel and America or Canada, because they establish themselves as a Jewish state. Now, any religion's,
Hmm.
welcome there, and you have mosques everywhere, and there's churches and all that. But primarily, they are a Jewish country, and they're not interested in changing that demographic to the extent that, just to touch on briefly, a lot of people are saying, well, why don't they all just join and become one big country? Why doesn't the West Bank and Gaza join Israel? Why doesn't a one-state solution work? And it's because then the majority of voters in a democracy would be Muslim. And Israelis, on the whole, are not keen on that demographic shift. Right now, the majority of voters are Jewish. I think something like maybe 30 or 35% are Muslim.
Right.
And that's like one point of contention that just I see as an obstacle.
I'm actually surprised that there's a bunch of Muslim people in Israel because I feel like it's so obviously a Jewish thing. I mean, it's kind of on the flag. They got like the symbol on there. I'm surprised, like, just be like,
It would really surprise you that you have towns in Israel that have, even by the name of the town, you can tell if it's an Arab Muslim town or a Jewish town. You have, Tel Aviv, and then you have al Fachem, or you'd have Haifa, and then you'd have Baka al Garbia. And you see all of these places when you're just driving on the highway, and an Arab town will be full of mosques and ziggurats, and you can hear the morning prayers even from most of the Jewish towns. It's a everything. So I don't know if you have anything like this in America, but in Canada, everything's written in French and English. It's mandatory. All services have to be available in French and English.
I
And
think
in
for us
Israel,
it's in English and Spanish because we do have a lot of
yeah,
Spanish people here.
Yeah.
right. That makes sense. And in Israel, it's Hebrew and Arabic. Everything's available in Arabic. Everything's available in Hebrew. Every sign is written in Arabic and Hebrew. So, yeah, it's an interesting little thing that just maybe a lot of people who are outside that part of the world don't understand.
That is, well, that is, I guess, you learn something new every day.
A lot of support for English and Russian as well. They have a lot of English and Russian immigrants.
That's nearby. I can see that. Uh, Dr. Voz, why are you pro Palestinian? What do you like about, I guess, quote unquote, your side?
I believe that the West has long destroyed that region of the world, and that the state of Israel has been pushed by the West, and the Western countries do not take the people of the region into account, or they do this in many countries, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, African countries, even the foundation of America. For the hundreds of years, the Western nations have kind of ignored the values of the people that live there and what they want, and impose themselves onto the region through superimposed borders and states.
Okay. What are your guys' thoughts of the disputes over territories such as the Gaza Strip, the West Bank? What are your thoughts on that, Dr. Voss?
I think both of us, like Dr. Voz and myself, we should touch on like why that territory is how it is. He studied this, so I'll leave that open to him. But I just wanted to interject.
Okay,
All right, Doctor,
Voss.
it's up to you.
Well, the territory is the way it is because following the Second World War, the Allied powers created the State of Israel in the British Mandate of Palestine to make a homeland for the Jewish people. But they did not take into account necessarily how the people of that region would feel when making that state. And, the hands of the region had been, control had been tossed from colonial power to colonial power. And it's a basis of colonization, I feel.
That's fair. So you have people always talk about the Palestinians in two places, the West Bank and Gaza. Gaza was part of Egypt, and the West Bank obviously was part of Jordan. How they became what they are today was a result of the war in 48 and then further conflicts in the end of the 60s and the beginning of the 70s. And it's not a good situation for those living there now, Gaza especially. But what ended up happening as a result of this war in 48, and just to contextualize it a bit, the United Nations took over the mandate when the British decided to leave. And they left after World War II. They were exhausted in one way or another. Whether that was a good decision or not, I'm sure Dr. Voz and I can touch on that. But the British decided to leave. And with them leaving, someone had to be in charge. They handed it off to the United Nations or the League of Nations. They created these borders that split the mandate into a Jewish state and an Arab state. And the Jews thought that was okay, and the Arabs thought it was unfair and unjust, and were not going to take that offer. I think it's totally debatable how fair that was. but they decided not to take it, and as a result, Israel was, well, it wasn't Israel at the time, it was the Jewish state, or what would be the Jewish state. They thought, let's declare independence, and they became the state of Israel. This really upset the Arab world, and a few of the Arab countries in the region, along with the Arabs in Gaza and what was going to be the Arab state, they fought to conquer Israel. As a result of that war, it created a lot of refugees, over 1 million refugees. I'm sure Dr. Voz has the exact number, but something like 700,000 of them went to Lebanon and formed what we know as Hezbollah today. And a lot of the population of Lebanon, something like 200,000 to, I think, Egypt and 100,000 to Jordan, or maybe I have it the other way around. Jordan granted the West Bank refugees, which was part of Jordan at the time, citizenship. Egypt did not. They just put them in Gaza, as in like camps. Not camps in the incredibly derogatory sense, but refugee camps. I'll let Dr. Voz continue from here because I feel like I've talked too much.
Okay, Dr. Voss.
Yes. So upon that, I believe, from what I've, the literature that I've consumed, that I believe that the Jewish people do deserve a state. They do deserve the right to exist. That many nations throughout history have challenged, and I'd like to make it clear that I'm not necessarily pro Hamas or pro Hezbollah. I am very strongly against the radical extremism that they have. I'm more on the side of the people of Palestine, the innocent people who are not militants and such.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think Hamas, don't they like kill infants or something?
They're peas in a pod when it comes to, ISIS and the Houthis and Islamic militant groups. They're an Islamic militant group. They're interested in jihad and martyrdom and making the world like them. It's very hard to find good things about them. I'll put it that way.
I think
It's a little similar.
I
Would
think
it
the
be like a stretch?
problem.
Like, oh, you can go, Dr. West.
I think that the problem that is the most prevalent with groups such as that, but more so Hamas than other groups like, as you mentioned, is the fact that they've lost, in the wars over the past 8 years. They've lost father figures. They've lost, um, all all have lost members of their family, and that causes them to basically, I guess, the psychiatric aspect of it. They find that these groups provide them some sense of security, which is saddening. But we must figure out a way in the future to prevent more and more people from joining these groups. Because, as I've stated, the one of the largest reasons for people joining is because they feel like they have no other option, and they find that as their last resort to try to protect their families.
You are absolutely right. I'm really glad that you touched on that because the problem, as you stated, is that not just a cycle of revenge, but people are motivated to join these groups because of the perceived protection they provide. If you look at Lebanon, where you have this enormous army of Hezbollah that gets direction and funds from Iran, they provide a lot of protection to people in Lebanon. If you live in Beirut or anywhere south, there are so many neighborhoods where it behooves you, it's beneficial to be friends with Hezbollah. And they have the resources to outmatch Lebanon's own army. And in Gaza, Hamas isn't just a group operating inside the country like Hezbollah in Lebanon, they are the government. and they've been the government for decades, more than a generation. They were elected democratically, but they've not had an election in a generation, and that is at the point where you start to question the democratic nature of it. I've always thought that these changes within Lebanon and Gaza need to come from within. I think it's very problematic if we expect Israel or the United States or any other country to come in and fix Hamas and give them a better government. I think the Gazan people have to do that, but I think it's easier said than done. There's a lot of political suppression. If you are not pro-Hamas, you're going to have a hard time living in Gaza, and I think it's something like similar to what you touched on. I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Yes, I believe it. I think the reason that it has been so even more contentious recently in the 21st century, uh, it's certainly in the 1900s it was a contentious issue, but it was not as large and mainstream, and the wars were handled obviously differently than they are now. Now there's a lot more extremism, and I appreciate the fact that you are um one. I was asked this earlier, but I will say that um the Israeli side, one thing I very positively believe about them is they're very anti Iranian stance, because from what I've studied about the geopolitical structure of the region, the Iranian influence has certainly pushed that extremist mindset more and more, and has made um, the humanitarian aspect of the conflict much worse, due to the um, the killing of babies and women, and the hostage taking, and all of that is a very pro-Iranian mindset. So, if anything, I can say very positively about the Israeli side is that they have a very strong stance against pushing back Iranian influence in the region, which will certainly help in the future, um, hopefully to have the conflict um, resolved somewhat peacefully.
Unfortunately, like in any war, it's the innocent people that suffer the most when these governments and armies go at each other. And as you touched on, Iran has a lot of motivation to perpetuate this war because it helps their cause politically, ideologically. And Hamas, much of their leadership, they don't live in Gaza. They're not getting bombed. They don't have to see any of this suffering up close. They live in Qatar. Many of them are billionaires, and much of the money that gets funneled into Gaza through all of these charitable organizations that have good intentions go into the pockets of these people we're talking about who wish to perpetuate the war. And to be fair, it's not just these people. There are Israelis on the extremist side, particularly religious extremists, many of them now part of the Israeli government, friends of Netanyahu. They benefit from this war because they think it's a holy war that they're going to win. They want all of the territory. They don't care what the cost is to get that territory because they think it's been parceled out to them by God. None of that is conducive to peace. None of that is going to make the innocent people's lives better. Religious extremism, I guess, just to put a cap on that, religious extremism is a problem on both sides. It's just fortunate that, at least in Israel's case, there are so many millions of people living there that are against this, and the government can't take any extreme action without having to answer to these people. And for the last year or so, and I remember for about 50 weeks leading up to October 7th, every weekend there were hundreds of thousands of Israelis in the streets calling to get Netanyahu out of office because they want a more moderate government, less extreme, less right wing, because they don't want to be perpetually at war. They just want to do what normal people do. They want to wake up and go to the beach and live their lives and raise their family.
Yes,
You know,
to add to that, I have to say I'm in just my general mindset. I'm not pro-Hamas. I'm more um, or neither anti-Israel. I believe the people of Israel have gone through a lot, um, especially from countries like Iran and Syria. Um, but I am against the Israeli Prime Minister and his, that's why I think the war culminating sooner would be beneficial, because the only thing keeping him in power is the fact that there is a war going on. And I think that the Israeli people deserve someone who can lead their nation and protect their interests better.
It's amazing to me that he managed to get elected again. He was deeply unpopular the first time, but this time he was able to form a majority coalition by pandering to the religious extremists, which is a problem in any country that has a large amount of these people who are only interested in their agenda that doesn't really benefit normal people.
No, I
They
heard this mentioned
go on.
before, but so you guys are against outside interference in the war, like stuff like the United States or whatever, or do you think it could be beneficial? Because a lot of
I think
people, I think, do believe that it could lead to like a World War III, perhaps.
it's probably sensationalism. I mean, I guess anything could lead to such a war that we all want to avoid. But in terms of your question regarding outside influence, I think it is more beneficial for Israel when there's outside influence, in the sense that the United States will defend them no matter what. They're not committed to helping Israel in any offensive way. They're not going to send troops with Israel to invade other countries, but they will send them billions of dollars and help them fund their Iron Dome program. And they will send an aircraft carrier in case Iran or one of these other countries is making gestures that suggest they want to attack Israel. But diplomatically, the United States has tried really hard in the past to solve this problem. George Bush, Bill Clinton, they have made great efforts to bring both sides to the table, put together a plan that sounds really fair, and then it just falls apart. I think, just a short answer to your question, outside influence can be helpful. It just hasn't been so far.
Yeah.
And a grassroots political movement is what both countries need most right now, and that means outside influence doesn't play a part, but it has its place diplomatically. I think the U.S. would be it would be great if they could come to Israel and do what Clinton tried to do, but then it would require someone speaking on behalf of Gazans and people in the West Bank who is also inclined to make a reasonable deal, and I just don't see them with that sort of leadership right now.
Yeah, so the U.S. has supported Palestinian civilizations in Gaza, the West Bank, and they've provided over $674 million already. So they're kind of
Yes, I definitely, from what I've seen, I remember this was months ago, but the Americans were building um, their own
Port.
pier to bring supplies to Gaza through shipping. I think I think we can look to other wars, such as the war in Ukraine. Um, Certain countries have obviously given military aid, um, but I think the most important thing is to give. I think American influence, especially, is important, being a superpower. I think the Americans should give humanitarian aid to the Gazan people, and on the opposite side, giving uh, defensive capabilities, such as Jordan said, the Iron Dome is important because the defensive capabilities are more so helping the people and less the military And I think this is how we should involve ourselves, to protect the people of both sides. And defensive technology is one of the best ways to do that. So I do agree with helping the Iron Dome.
Just so, for a bit of context, for people who aren't as aware, the Iron Dome is a defense system in Israel whose job it is to track missiles coming towards the country and eliminate them before they can land. And these missiles often come from Gaza and most often land in cities close to Gaza, such as Ashkelon or Sderot. These are towns where property is very cheap because they get rockets every year. There are thousands of rockets launched from Gaza every year at civilian cities. And in Israel, every home, in every apartment building, every apartment, there is a bomb shelter. They call it a mamad. And these are rooms in every apartment, in every house that have incredibly thick walls. Not all houses, I guess some of the older ones don't have it, but in areas where you don't have one in your house, there are neighborhood shelters, and everyone knows where the closest one is. They have very thick walls, they protect against biological warfare. Israel is very committed to protecting its people from these attacks. And in Gaza, these people don't have that protection. They have no bomb shelters. They're not allowed into the tunnels where Hamas operates. And Hamas operates underneath hospitals and schools and city centers. It's very difficult to protect these people. And I wish a lot of the money that was going to Gaza would be used for defensive purposes. I'm all for Gaza having defensive infrastructure in case anyone attacks them. Now, I imagine the only ones that would be Israel, and it's just really unfortunate how one-sided that is.
Yeah.
All right, Dr. Voz, any comments on that?
Yes, I certainly agree with the idea that it's very one-sided. I mean, the fact that it is a shame that for the people of Palestine that the extremist group running their country runs it like a dictatorship. I certainly think the majority of Palestinian people do not want Hamas. As said, most of the leaders are not from Palestine; they're from other Arab countries, and
Yeah.
I think they are kind of stirring the flames of war for their own benefit, for their own monetary gain, and this is very unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, like in America, I think people have been like losing their jobs if they say anything like pro-Palestinian or if anything related to that. I've seen a couple articles. I think actors have been like getting fired from projects if they mention like anything pro-Palestine.
I think
I think people,
go on.
I think people don't understand that like Palestine isn't just like the terrorist groups. It's like there's actual like innocent people too.
It's probably, you could speak to this, everyone here can. No matter where I go, if it's in Canada or the United States, I've been traveling a lot between both lately. You'll see signs everywhere: Free Palestine, Free Gaza. And that means something different to everyone. I think with most reasonable people, you want to free Gaza from Hamas. They're the big obstacle to making their lives better right now and the most realistic path towards peace. But it seems to be something that's on everyone's mind, or it's certainly the most popular political movement right now. Even when I go to small towns with a few thousand people, you'll see posters related to this. If you go to New York, if you go to Toronto, Vancouver, LA, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was a major topic at the presidential debate the other day.
Every
Yes.
U.S. president has been pro-Israel. That's just
Right.
politically where they're at.
Yeah. I remember
Yes, from
Didn't
what I
like
saw in
Jimmy
the
Carter made like the leader of Israel shake hands with like the leader of Egypt or something, and then the guy got assassinated.
yes, I think I do recall seeing that. But back to the
Well, that was like
from
in the
what I saw in the
70s.
debate, um, I think um, from what I saw in the debate, there wasn't that much about Israel or Palestine, but that is because the U.S. government is very pro-Israel for the most part, unless you get to the very left extremism. But the majority of political leaders in the United States are supportive of Israel, obviously because of its Western style of government, Western values. So yeah, I guess that's just to answer your question or statement in response, Mr. Curbs.
All right. Well, I appreciate that. But what do you think could be like the best way that this could end with like both do you think one party has to like sort of be like almost like severely destroyed in order for this to like be over, or do you think it could like there's a chance that it could like end maybe like more civilly?
You mean in terms of the U.S. parties or just between Israel and Gaza?
No, no, Israel and Gaza,
Uh,
U.S.
Both need a new government. I don't think Netanyahu's government is going to resolve this anytime soon or peacefully. And I don't think Hamas has any interest in shaking hands with Netanyahu and committing to no more rockets or kidnappings or anything. They both need to be
Yeah, it's
replaced.
true.
Oh dear.
Yeah,
Yes,
but that's not going to be
I
done easily.
I agree because Netanyahu is he's still in power. I mean, he was under in investigation for charges of fraud before this war, and now he is still in power. And I think part of the reason he is continuing the war is very similar to American president. I believe it was Richard Nixon who kept the Vietnam going so that he could get reelected. It's very similar. I mean, he wants to stay in power, um, and the war is, he's taking religious extremists to back him so that he can stay in power, which is very unfortunate to the people suffering on both sides because these soldiers, Israeli soldiers, obviously do not want to be um, in a combat zone dealing with terrorists such as Hamas, but at the same time, the civilians of Palestine do not want to be uh, in this war either. So it's
And
unfortunate for both sides.
it's just for some context in Israel, the draft they have conscription, mandatory conscription. So after high school, men have to serve for 3 years and women for two, unless they're married. There are extenuating circumstances, but many Israelis they get into the military because they have to, and they just can't wait to get out. Or many of them enjoy it like a adult summer camp, assuming there's no war going on, meaning that they make friends, they learn some things, they get to go home every now and then. They don't, most, I would hope, I certainly can't speak for everyone, but I would hope most don't want to be at war with anyone. They just want to get their service done with and get back to real life. And if you're
Yeah,
a
that's
Yes,
gotta
parent,
be scary.
if you're just to speak like as an old person, if you're a parent and you have a kid finishing high school, in most countries that means they're going to live at home for a little bit, they're going to go to college or university, they're going to start working. In Israel, if you're a parent, you're worried your kid's going to get into a combat zone when they finish school. And you are motivated to elect a government that doesn't want to put your kids in danger.
yes, I think comparing this war to, I think a very good analogy is comparing it to the Vietnam War in America. I mean, the Vietnamese were not good government. They were um, communist dictatorship. But then the American soldiers were drafted, and most of them did not want to be there, and they just wanted to get their service over with and continue the war. the government. So, you see a lot of, even comparing it to protests in Israel against Netanyahu. I think the people aren't necessarily the problem. The governments are the problem because neither people want this war. Um, they just want to be able to live their lives safely and happily.
That's very important to keep in mind. It's a good point.
Well, what do you think is is there anything like someone who doesn't live in like either country, like is there anything they could do to like help out, or is it just like other than just like donations and
You
stuff?
know, from a personal point of view, when you live far away from a conflict and you want to make some kind of impact, I think it's just important that when you're around people talking about it or when the subject comes up, to just emphasize the fact that these countries are made of normal people who just go to cafes and go to school and just want to live normal lives. And anyone who's on the side of finding a peaceful solution to the conflict is someone you want to associate with. And if you end up speaking to someone who thinks the solution is to kill everyone on the other side, I think it would be a good idea to explain to them that that's not going to bring peace to anyone. It just means hundreds of thousands or millions of people could get killed. You know,
That is true.
the a lot of people think, well, what if Hamas wins? I don't. Their version of victory is taking over Israel and making it another Islamic caliphate under Iran's thumb. And if you talk to people and they're like, "Oh yeah, that's how it should be," I'm just going to have to disagree with them. I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think Hamas is good for the people they're in charge of now. I have no reason to think they'd be great leaders if they had more land and more people to control. Whereas Israel, they don't have a lot of people. They are not interested in expanding into Egypt or Jordan, but it is totally fair. I don't want to miss this point. I feel like we both kind of missed this. What they're doing in the West Bank is not good for the peace process, and they've been doing it for a really long time, even not under Netanyahu. Basically, the West Bank is land that was set aside for a future Palestinian state that does not exist. They have a government there, but that government controls a very small part of it. The biggest chunk of it is controlled by a mix of Israelis and people from the Palestinian Authority. And then another chunk of it is just controlled by Israel. But they continue to expand into the areas they control. And they're not just building little camps there, they're building towns, like with, you know, big towns. The kind of towns where you would expect a train station to pop up any day. That is not good in the sense that there are Israelis who move there because the property is so cheap, and even though it might not have much infrastructure in terms of, you know, train access and all of this, that doesn't matter to them. They want to move there because they see it as Jewish ancestral homeland. Judea and Samaria are the two territories that make up the West Bank. Of course, any Jew with historical knowledge will know Judea is where they come from, and so they don't mind moving there. But then it creates all this tension between the Israelis moving there and the Palestinians who have a much lower quality of life. And that situation needs to change. But every year that it doesn't get fixed, it gets worse because they build up more and more. And it would become harder and harder to take them out.
All right, Dr. Voz, would you like to respond to that?
Dr. Mars, you got anything to say?
Yes,
Okay.
I think that the best way for the future of Israel and Palestine is to have Hamas not be in power, and I think the government, the Palestinian government in charge in the West Bank, um, is definitely a lot more peaceful and valuable for keeping peace in the region, and I think the fact that there are two governments controlling each different area of the Palestinian states is not good because one is very extremist, but then the West Bank government and the Palestinian Authority has to deal with, people kind of associating the two and acting like they are the same thing, but they are not, and that is harmful to the Palestinian people. And I definitely am against the Israeli settling of the West Bank too, because that area was set aside for the Palestinians. And that's something that even before this war, Israelis were protesting against it, Palestinians were protesting against it, people in the West were all protesting against the West Bank settlement. And that was on the most contentious part until the Hamas attacks.
That you, Mr. Curbs, sorry, you touched on American influence, and Clinton had negotiated a deal where Israel would agree to leave the entire West Bank, or something like 97% of it, and give the Palestinian state a capital in East Jerusalem, give them right of return, and that was decades ago now, and it would have been hard for Israel to do it then. But now I feel like it's that much more difficult. But if a U.S. administration could come into power that would be willing to put a deal like this on the table again, that would be fantastic, because I don't think any reasonable person can look at what's happening in the West Bank and think that that's good for the peace process or good for the Palestinians. And the Israelis don't need that extra land. They have lots of land in the south that they don't settle because it's desert. But that's not anyone else's problem.
Yeah, I do know that there are a decent amount of Americans that do feel like, the U.S. government like shouldn't get involved like at all. It's not their thing to get involved in. But I think for the better of the world, it would be good to have something similar to that, just to quell down like some of the tensions, because world tensions have been rising. I feel like there has been like more, like there's been a decent amount of wars going on, which probably shouldn't. Russia's been kind of going crazy too. So something like that could just lower the tensions just a little bit.
I think when you're a superpower, it's your responsibility to play police if you think your values are the superior ones. But again, we're biased. We think Western values are good ones. So when America exerts its influence all over the world, we think they're acting on our behalf. If we think what they're trying to do is cede those values to countries that don't have them. But I mean, it fails spectacularly sometimes. If you just look at Afghanistan, they went there to fight the Taliban, and the Taliban are still in charge.
Yeah. All right. Well, I appreciate you guys, spend your time here. I feel like this was actually a very civil discussion, civil debate.
Very nice.
I agree.
I actually enjoyed this a lot. There was a
This is
lot of good
how
info that I learned that I probably should have already known, but whatever.
I agree. This is how political conversations should be had. You should have,
They're more like this.
I think,
Hey, there'd probably be a
yes,
lot of problems solved quicker.
two sides realizing that they are closer in belief than they actually initially think. And I'm glad that we are able to realize that the polarization that we see isn't as deep as the media likes to portray. I'm happy
Yeah,
for
the
that.
media is definitely a big factor. They always, like I said, there was claims before of like, oh, World War III. They always like to hype things up just so people can read their articles and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying for engagement and hysteria
Mm.
and scoring points.
But that only worsens things.
Well, that's a discussion in itself.
All right. Well, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you. Have a good evening, everyone.
Our curves say the line.
Yep. Have a good night.
Have a good
There you
night,
go. I said
everyone.
your silly catchphrase.